Hey guys, it's COREROSS, and today we're starting a new series of videos. We're going to look at every feature of CGX and whether it was a success or failure. And this video will be focusing on the feature of modernized maps. And if you don't know, CGX was an upgrade to Rainbow Six Siege, which was in development for about 3 years, with work going on parallel to also maintaining Rainbow Six Siege at the time. And one of the main features was modernized maps, which brought in 3 key features that were public facing. And these were improved visuals by having better lighting and textures, new gameplay elements like gas pipes and fire extinguishers, with also a change to metal detectors on the new maps as well. And the first maps to be modernized were Bank, Clubhouse Border, Chalet, and Cafe, with the plan to modernize about 3 maps every season after that, which would mean in total it would take about 2 years after CGX's launch to modernize all the maps within Rainbow Six Siege. However, there's some maps that I don't expect they'll ever modernize, like say Yacht and Plane. And then behind the scenes, there's also an additional benefit to modernizing these maps, and that is that a lot of the older maps were made on an older system, which means bug fixing them is almost impossible at this point because a lot of it is obsolete. And as such, the modernization allows them to rebuild the map in the new system and should be a benefit going forward into the future. So let's start assessing if this feature has been a success or failure, and especially now we're a couple of seasons into CGX, we've had our second wave of modernized maps, which is allowing us to see how their plans are evolving as things go forward. And I think the first thing we'll talk about is the new gameplay elements, the gas pipes and the fire extinguishers. I think the gas pipes, of course, are the much more impactful gameplay mechanic, as they can be used to eliminate players or block off certain access points by using the fire mechanics. And overall, I think these have been relatively successful, with me having quite a lot of fun using them with Capcan traps and simply shooting them sometimes. And I would say that I probably use them about once or twice per game. However, with the second wave of modernized maps, which was Nighthaven's Lab, Consulate, and Lair, these pipes are no longer being placed next to doors, so they cannot be used with Capcan, and their overall placements is no longer as useful as in the original maps, which has diminished the already small impact they had on gameplay to the point of where now in these wave of new maps, I don't use the pipes at all as of yet. And my overall conclusion here is that for fire extinguishers, I've enjoyed having them on the map, and I've definitely used them at times, and people have used them against me, and overall it's been a small improvement to overall gameplay. And then for gas pipes, there was a decent impact here where I was using these and enjoying using them every single game. However, I have seen a shift on how these are being placed on the newer modernized maps, and as a result on those ones I don't use them at all, and I expect that at some point they'll come back and they'll change the positions of the pipes on the original modernized maps and put them in places that are not as good for Capcan and overall not as good position wise for actually using during the game. And I'll probably go down to using them 0 times per game. And then for the new metal detectors, I have not noticed a change at all. It does not impact me in the slightest, but I think for some players, especially people who use impact EMPs regularly, they're going to have a lot more fun with the metal detectors and try to sneak past. Now let's talk about the improved graphics of these maps. And I think when CGX was announced, this was very much one of the big features of the upgrade. So when we did eventually get the new maps and we were able to compare them side by side, there was of course a visual difference. However, I don't think it's down to mostly a graphical improvement, but more about how the artists making the maps has made them more visually interesting, because 10 years ago when Siege launched, the maps were very much light and dark areas with a lot of contrast, and then as time went on to make visibility better, maps became more uniformly lit, and that was a design choice, not really a graphics choice. And then with the modernized maps, we've seen that come back, but there's a little bit more contrast in areas and lighting is just a little bit nicer. But I don't think it's down to the technology that's being used. I think if maybe they had dropped the older gen consoles and brought in just unified ray tracing or something like that, then that might have made a much bigger impact graphically than what we've seen. However, the maps, I think, look better than they did. However, when it comes to the conclusion here, it's very clear for me. I would very happily ditch the 3 modernized maps per season and put in a reworked map instead, and I would be a lot happier. And I also have to tag on to here that with the modernized maps with CGX's launch, there was a lot of exploits getting into roofs and such. And as a result of that, it really kind of wrecked the launch of CGX, and it took them a good couple of months to fix those problems. Now, thankfully, in the new season with 3 new modernized maps, we didn't see the same issue, so most likely they were able to get on top of this and stop this being a future problem. But that's us now going over what the modernized maps brought to CGX. None of them are major, and like I say, I would quite happily turn them in for one single reworked map every season instead. So let's now talk about a downside. And the big downside for me is that CGX was in development for 3 years. Obviously, when it came to the map team, they were most likely working for the most part on the Joe front map, and of course they were probably maintaining the maps in Siege at the time too, so they only got 3 modernized maps for launch. But this means we now have a nagging thing, which is that the last couple of years we've not got much content in the game. As a result, I think the game has become a lot more stale in a lot of areas, and that's because, of course, they were making CGX at the time. That's where a lot of development time was going, and that's what they were building. But then when CGX launched, I was hoping for that production resources to then be put into making new content. So new maps, new events, and overall just new content for the game. Instead, we have what I'm going to call the CGX lag, which is that for the next 2 years, potentially, depending on how many maps they decide to modernize, they're going to be modernizing those maps. Now, they'll do the odd rework. We know that in Season 4, we're getting a reworked map. And then most likely, I would guess there's a new map in year 11. But this is very much a far cry from that CGX production being turned into content creation. But then I guess there is a problem of what is content. Like, you could easily argue that these modernized maps are new content, as they're kind of revitalized versions of the old stuff. However, of course, I would not consider it to be new content. I would consider it to just be improved old content. Now, I'm also sure that there's probably a worry behind the scenes that Siege already has too many maps, because there is tons. Like, I just went and looked at the map list and I'm amazed at how many there actually is. And it's a lot more than I can hold in my brain at any one time. So learning it as a new player is tough, right? And if you, let's say they added every single year, they added 4 new maps, that would be insane to learn all those maps. And we've seen players, they don't like to learn new maps. They'll quite happily ban them and stuff like that. But personally, I love to continually learn new stuff and not to stop, which I'm not sure if that's actually a majority view of the player base. And then I would be happy with them also putting more map production into events. So a good example, and a great example right now, is Doctor's Curse. It's going to return for Halloween, and it's going to have a new map. And that's perfect because the game mode is hide and seek. So adding new maps with new hiding spots, it's a sweet idea. And of course, it's a pity that it happens now and not in the last couple of years. For example, take Showdown. If that had a new map every single year, then you could end up with a lot more variety, even bringing back the same events if they had new maps. And like I say, I'm going to give a lot of praise here for the fact that Doctor's Curse this year will have a new map. And of course, that's happening after CGX's launch. And I assume that's because some production is capable of going off and doing other things now. And that now brings us to the final conclusion of this video about modernized maps as a feature of Siege X. And I think overall making this video has changed my opinion a little bit. I was kind of going into this thinking that I would love to just ditch the modernized maps and switch them out for one reworked map per season instead. But the more I've thought about it, the more I think that there's probably a few more benefits that I'm not seeing that'll probably pay dividends long into the future. And I think there's also clear evidence that the map team has been retasked after CGX's launch on doing like the rework next season, the new Doctor's Curse map, and I would assume they have to do at least some work on the event that's coming up as well, which would be map-based too. So there is evidence that at least some of those resources from CGX are switching over to content creation. But as a CGX feature overall, I think this has been only a mild success. I think the graphical overhaul isn't enough to make it worthwhile. If there was something like a new technology being used to make the maps really look good, then that would be incredible. But when I look at the current Siege maps and I look at the old versions, I don't see enough difference to make it worthwhile. And then one real disappointment is the new gameplay elements with stuff like the gas pipes, because they've really been watered down and I don't think they're originally what they were going to be promised to be. So overall here, I think that the modernized maps have been a success, but a very mild one, unfortunately. And it's kind of the same thing for a lot of CJEX. It's not as transformative as it was originally advertised to be.